Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Logan welded the final bolt on his new steel fence, he didn't know it would spark an all-out war. What began as a simple boundary upgrade turned into a battle of wills against a power-hungry HOA president, and her Lexus never saw it coming. Welcome to the fence line feud. I'd been meaning to upgrade that northern fence line for a while. The old wood posts were sagging from 30 years of wind, snow, and the occasional steer using them for a scratching post. With spring thaw finally behind us, it felt like the right time. I ordered custom steel panels from a supplier in Casper, installed new reinforced corner posts sunk 4 feet deep, and added reflective markers along the outer line. It wasn't just about keeping the livestock in, it was about sending a message. This is private land, and I don't owe a damn thing to the people over in Cedar Hollow Estates. The subdivision butts up against my north pasture. Looks like a slice of suburbia dropped into the high desert. Identical stucco homes, plastic lawns, and an HOA with more rules than common sense. I never joined their association, never planned to. My property predates their entire development by 70 years, but that's never stopped them from acting like I should fall in line. Especially Karen Dewhurst, their newly elected president. She's the kind who smiles like she's sizing up a weak spot. Karen had already stopped by last fall, all pleasant and neighborly, suggesting I consider adjusting the fence line for visual cohesion. I told her my cows didn't care about cohesion, and that was the end of it. Or so I thought. When I finished the last weld on the new gate, I stepped back and admired it. 10-gauge steel, powder-coated in matte black, clean lines, secure hinges, and 2 fresh no trespassing signs bolted into the posts. I even added a laminated map with GPS coordinates showing the legal boundary line, just in case anyone claimed to be confused. That night, I got a note tucked under my windshield wiper when I parked by the barn. Your fence is not in the spirit of community. Please consider the aesthetic impact. No name, no signature, but the handwriting looked suspiciously like Karen's. Tall, angular letters and dramatic loops, like she was still practicing cursive for award season. I tossed it into the fire barrel. The next morning, someone had rotated one of my no trespassing signs upside down. Cute, passive-aggressive nonsense is basically HOA currency. I straightened it, tightened the bolts, and added another sign that read, "Violators will be recorded and prosecuted, not bluffing." The camera I mounted to the gatepost wasn't hidden. I wanted them to see the blinking red light. That evening, my neighbor Hank rode over from the east side on his ATV. He slowed down by the new fence and whistled. "Damn, Logan, that thing'll stop a truck." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," I said. He smirked. Word is Karen's been talking to the board about unauthorized structures visible from community roads. My land, my money, my fence. They can talk all they want. We stood there a minute, watching the sun dip behind the hills, lighting up the steel like a line of fire. "She's not going to let it go," Hank said finally. "I don't expect her to." I slept well that night. The kind of sleep you earn after working with your hands all day. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the dogs barked once, then settled. Probably a coyote passing through. Out here, that's just background noise. But I had no idea just how loud things were about to get. It was just after sunrise when I heard the crunch. Not the usual gravel under-tire sound I'm used to, but a full-bodied metallic crunch, followed by the high-pitched whine of an engine revving and then stalling out. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee, still in my flannel and boots, when the dogs started barking like the devil had arrived in a sedan. I grabbed my coat, stepped out onto the porch, and sure enough, there it was. A white Lexus GX. Shiny, spotless, and now crumpled like a beer can against the northern fence post. The front right bumper had folded in on itself, the headlight smashed clean through. Sitting behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled rage, was Karen Dewhurst. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy yelling into her phone. I caught fragments like emergency and dangerous obstruction. I walked slowly toward the fence, boots crunching on the frost-bitten ground. I didn't say a word, just lifted my phone and snapped a few pictures. Then I gestured up at the camera on the gatepost, its little red light blinking faithfully. That's when she saw me. "You can't just build walls across public access," she shrieked, flinging her door open so hard it bounced off the frame. She staggered out, still gripping her phone. "This is reckless endangerment." I almost died. "You took a wrong turn, Karen," I said calmly. "There's no public access here. This is private land, and you plowed straight into it. Hell of a way to say good morning." "I was following GPS," she snapped. "It brought me through your godforsaken pasture, and suddenly there's this medieval barricade where the road used to be." "There's never been a public road here," I replied, pulling a laminated plat map from my jacket pocket and unfolding it. This was a cattle trail back in the day, never maintained by the county, never designated for public use. And I've had signs up for a week. She ignored the map entirely, staggering back to her car, now taking pictures of the fence, the signs, the gate, her own broken bumper. Then she pointed dramatically at a scrape on her forehead. It wasn't bleeding, just red. "Do you see this? I could have a concussion. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said, leaning against the gate. They showed up in under 15 minutes. 2 sheriff's deputies, both local boys who'd been out here more than once for loose livestock or weather damage. One of them, Deputy Carson, gave me a polite nod before approaching Karen. She launched into a full-scale performance, voice shaking, hand pressed to her forehead like she'd survived a shootout. Claimed I had modified a shared access route without notice, that my fence was a deliberate community hazard, and that I had menaced her with cameras and signage. I just handed the deputy the plat map, my fencing permit, and the footage from the camera showing her blowing through the warning signs and driving a good 10 feet into my property before making contact. Carson watched the clip on my phone, scratched his beard, and said, "Well, that's pretty conclusive." Karen's tone changed quickly. "So you're taking his side? Are you even going to ticket him? That fence is aggressive." "It's not neighborly. The fence is legal," Carson replied evenly, "and you drove onto private land. You okay to drive?" "My nail is broken, my car is totaled, and this monster," she spat, pointing at me, "has no empathy whatsoever. If you want to file a report, you're free to do so," he said. But from what I see, this was an accident caused by driver error. She didn't take that well. I half expected her to fake fainting. Instead, she snapped photos of the deputies, her car, the fence again, and finally me, right before storming off with her rear hatch swinging open and a pair of yoga mats falling out into the dirt. The deputies helped me close the gate, wished me a good morning, and drove off. I walked the fence line again once they were gone. The post she hit was bent slightly, but still solid. Good welds. I'd make repairs later. By noon, there was a post on the Cedar Hollow Community Board titled "Hostile Fence Incident, Unlicensed Construction." It didn't mention my name, but anyone within 50 miles would know who she meant. By sundown, someone had thrown an empty Starbucks cup into my pasture. I took that as a declaration of war. About a week passed with nothing but passive-aggressive silence from Cedar Hollow. I figured maybe Karen had finally realized she wasn't in California anymore, that out here, fences mean something. But of course, I'd underestimated her capacity for escalation. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a private process server who looked both amused and mildly apologetic. "Mr. Travers?" "Yep." "You've been served." He handed me a thick packet of documents and tipped his hat before walking off like he didn't want to be seen too close to the blast radius. Inside was a civil complaint filed by one Karen Dewhurst, president of the Cedar Hollow Estates HOA. She was suing me for reckless construction, personal endangerment, emotional trauma, and, this one got me, willful destruction of community harmony. She even claimed to have sustained permanent nail bed damage from her so-called crash and attached a photo of her broken French manicure with the drama of a crime scene exhibit. I laughed out loud. Then I called my lawyer. Rita Chandler has been handling ranchers' legal issues in Johnson County for over 20 years. Sharp as a tack, no nonsense, and blessed with the patience of a mule. "She's suing you for a fence," she said flatly after skimming the first 2 pages. She drove her car into it. "Let me guess, HOA president." Bingo. Rita sighed like she'd just seen this same movie for the 100th time. "I'll file a response. But if she's going public with this, you need to get ahead of it." Turns out she already had. That same day, the Cedar Hollow View, a newsletter nobody asked for but everybody got, published an op-ed by Karen titled "When Fences Divide Hearts." It was pure HOA poetry, claimed that the spiteful installation of militarized fencing threatened. the spiritual tranquility of our neighborhood, and that certain individuals were choosing isolation over unity. There was a grainy photo of my fence from a weird angle that made it look like I'd built a prison wall. I would have been offended if it weren't so damn funny. Then came the real kicker. She claimed in the article that my fence was not only improperly zoned, but constructed on a public easement. An outright lie, and one easily disproven. Still, it was clear she was trying to stir up the HOA membership, turn public opinion against me, and push some kind of legal pressure campaign. That evening, 3 SUVs parked along the dirt road outside my property. They didn't enter, but stood around talking and pointing at the fence, occasionally taking photos. I recognized 2 of them from the HOA board's online profile. One was holding what looked suspiciously like a laser measuring device. I walked up with my phone recording. "Can I help you folks?" They turned like I'd caught them spray painting a school wall. "We're just checking alignment," one said, "for the HOA's land inventory records." "HOA has no jurisdiction here," I replied. "And unless you're with the county assessor's office, you've got no business pointing lasers at my property." They muttered something about transparency and got back in their cars. The guy with the laser left a pamphlet wedged in my mailbox, "The Importance of Cooperative Community Aesthetics." I brought it inside, fed it to the wood stove, and poured myself a whiskey. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I walked the property line with my surveyor, Mike, who confirmed, again, that the entire fence was within my legal boundary, 8 feet inside the edge to be exact. We staked flags, took GPS measurements, and notarized a report. Karen wanted a fight. She was about to get one. You don't win fights like this by playing defense. Especially not with someone like Karen, who viewed HOA authority the way Napoleon viewed continental Europe. Hers by default, and any resistance a personal insult. Rita and I filed our formal response to the lawsuit within 48 hours. It was surgical, citing county records, land surveys, property lines, construction permits, and legal precedent. But we didn't stop there. I gave Rita a flash drive with every video from my gate camera since the fence was installed. One in particular made her pause and whistle low under her breath. In it, Karen's SUV shows up 3 days before the crash. She drives slowly along the edge of my property, stops, gets out with a clipboard, and walks several feet onto my land. She spends a full minute taking photos and jotting notes, then notices the camera, freezes, and bolts back to her car like a teenager caught tagging a wall. That right there was trespassing, and we were just getting started. I also brought in footage from my drone flights. I fly for inspections and herd tracking, nothing fancy, but I'd captured enough wide shots to prove beyond a doubt that the road Karen claimed was public access was just a dirt track that stopped 50 yards short of any county easement. And, more importantly, there was a bright orange sign at the junction that read, "Temporarily closed, private access only." Karen had driven around that sign to hit my fence, which meant she either couldn't read or didn't care. Either way, her victim narrative was looking thinner than her HOA-issued newsletter font. We added a counterclaim, unlawful entry, damage to property, malicious defamation, and public harassment. Rita smiled when she signed it. Let's see how HOA funds hold up in actual court. Then, 2 nights later, someone cut one of my gate chains. It wasn't subtle. Bolt cutters had taken a clean bite out of the padlock, and the gate was left slightly ajar. No animals got out, thankfully. I keep the pasture divided, but it was enough to light a fire in my gut. I checked the camera, grainy in the dark, but you could see a figure in a hoodie approach the gate, fumble with something metallic, then scurry off. I called it in. Sheriff's deputy came out, took my statement, looked at the footage, and agreed it looked like someone targeting the property. "You think it's retaliation?" he asked. "I think it's desperation," I said. "And I've got a good guess who stirred it up." He nodded slowly. "We'll add extra patrols." 2 days after that, a letter showed up taped to my fence. No envelope, just a passive-aggressive manifesto titled Reflections on Neighborliness. Anonymous, of course, but the language was pure Karen. Phrases like the invisible threads of community and shared visual serenity. At the bottom, in neat cursive, it said, "Perhaps this land would be happier under HOA guidance." I took it inside and pinned it on the fridge next to last year's bull sale receipts. Motivation. Then Hank came by again, riding slow, brows furrowed. "You see the new HOA map?" "What map?" He handed me a flyer printed on glossy stock. At the center was a color-coded diagram showing Cedar Hollow's influence perimeter, To my surprise and fury, it showed their HOA boundary bleeding over onto my land, marked with a little pending compliance review. "That's fiction," I growled. They dropped it in every mailbox east of the ridge. I took a deep breath and looked north toward the cluster of beige rooftops. I'd let her poke the bear long enough. It was time to let the bear growl. Rita filed the counterclaim on a Thursday, and by Friday afternoon, it was like a bomb had gone off in Cedar Hollow. The court had notified the HOA's legal representative, some firm out of Casper that probably thought they were handling another barking dog dispute. They weren't ready for a full-on property rights case backed by video evidence, land surveys, and a decorated Marine who didn't take kindly to being slandered in public. I'd asked Rita to include the footage of Karen's prior trespassing, and she had. Every second, the HOA board was rattled. I knew it because they started showing up in groups again, this time with clipboards, phones, and one guy carrying what looked like a makeshift measuring wheel duct taped to a golf club. They kept their distance, didn't cross the fence line, but made a big show of inspecting the border from the public dirt road. A couple of them snapped pictures of me as I drove my tractor past them, slow and smiling. Later that day, I got a voicemail from a local journalist, some kid from the Johnson County Herald, asking for a comment on the ongoing dispute between Cedar Hollow HOA and a local landowner. I didn't call back, but Rita did. She sent him the full court filing, every page of Karen's wild claims, every photo of her SUV crumpled against my fence, and the notarized survey showing my boundary lines like gospel. The article came out Sunday morning under the headline, "Rancher Countersues HOA President Over Property Clash." The best part? The quote from Karen, "I'm only trying to preserve the visual harmony of our neighborhood. Fences ruin that harmony." I clipped it out and stuck it next to her Reflections on Neighborliness letter. A theme was forming. Karen didn't like fences, or rules, or facts. Then the final piece dropped. While digging through property archives with my surveyor, Mike, we found something golden. A public complaint from 3 years ago in California filed against one Karen Dewhurst. Apparently, she'd tried to annex a slice of her neighbor's lot into her HOA's oversight zone. The man, a retired electrician, had fought back and won. The case ended with a formal ruling that Karen had willfully and knowingly misrepresented HOA authority. It was a pattern and admissible. Rita's eyes lit up when I brought her the file. "We introduced this at the evidentiary hearing," she said. "Shows intent, shows history, shows she knows exactly what she's doing." And just when I thought it couldn't get more absurd, a certified letter from the HOA arrived. Inside was a formal request to attend a mediation meeting regarding boundary adjustments. Their proposed compromise was to allow my fence to remain only if I agreed to have it painted community beige and grant HOA officers visual inspection. Access once per quarter. I didn't even bother replying. Instead, I posted a laminated sign on the fence post Karen had hit, right where the scratches from her Lexus still showed. It read, "Private ranch land. HOA ideas not welcome." By evening, someone had drawn a sad face on it with a Sharpie. The next day, it was gone, but I was just getting warmed up. The court date was set for late April, and as the weeks rolled on, I started to notice a shift in the air. Not just the spring thaw, though that helped, but in the way folks in town looked at me. At the feed store, guys who'd never said more than 2 words now slapped my shoulder and muttered things like, "Good on ya," or "About time someone stood up to 'em." I didn't have to ask who "them" was. Karen, on the other hand, was making herself scarcer. No more morning inspections down my road. No more SUVs hovering on the dirt shoulder. I figured her lawyers had told her to cool it, maybe for her own good. But of course, she couldn't help herself. One morning, I was out repairing a busted irrigation valve when I saw dust rising from the access road. A county vehicle pulled up, a white Ford with the seal of the planning department on the side. Guy gets out, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Travers." "Yeah. Mind if I ask you a few questions about a potential zoning conflict?" "Depends who sent you." He looked awkward. "We received a formal complaint about unpermitted fencing across a supposed historical trail easement." I blinked. "Supposed?" "We couldn't find any record in county plats, but the caller insisted the trail dates back to the homestead era." I almost laughed. "You mean the cow path that stops at my fence? The one Karen Dewhurst barreled into last month?" He didn't respond directly, just glanced at the fence. "We're required to follow up." I walked him through the boundary maps, showed him the drone footage, and handed over the certified land survey. To his credit, he nodded and said, "This is more than enough. Sorry for the inconvenience." But the message was clear. Karen wasn't done. She was going to try every bureaucratic loophole and nuisance she could find. That afternoon, I called Rita. "They're grasping at straws," she said, "but we document every single one. Next time a county vehicle shows up, ask for a reference number. We're compiling a pattern of harassment." We weren't the only ones watching. That weekend, a woman showed up at the ranch gate in a Subaru, waving from behind the wheel. She introduced herself as Maggie Thompson, a real estate agent who lived in the Cedar Hollow Fringe. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "A lot of us aren't happy with how the HOA's been acting. Karen doesn't speak for everyone." I raised an eyebrow. "You saying there's cracks in the ranks?" She smiled. "You didn't hear it from me, but let's just say, not everyone wants their dues going toward personal vendettas." Interesting. By Monday, I had my own idea brewing. If Karen was going to play games with zoning, I'd respond with something more public. I called a buddy of mine from Gillette who runs a welding shop. We worked up plans for a custom steel archway to mount over the gate where her car had met its glorious end. 10 feet high, black powder coat, sharp lettering. Took us a few days to weld and haul in sections, but by Friday, it was up. Across the arch it read, "Private range, not for HOA business big, bold, and visible from a half-mile away." That evening, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sunset hit the letters just right. At around 7, a familiar silver SUV crept down the ridge road, paused, and backed out without crossing the property line. Progress. By the time the evidentiary hearing rolled around, I was more than ready. Rita had our documentation printed, tabbed, and stacked like a tactical dossier. We'd submitted everything weeks ago, but now it was time to present it before a judge, in person. The courthouse in Buffalo wasn't big, but the hearing room was packed. Not just lawyers and staff. Actual neighbors had shown up, curious to see the showdown. Word had spread. Karen arrived flanked by 2 attorneys in charcoal suits and a third woman with a massive binder. She didn't look quite as smug as she had the day she plowed through my fence, but she still gave me that tight-lipped grimace she thought passed for a smile. I nodded back, like I might to a wasp nest before spraying it. The judge was a local, a stout no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Judge Caroline Hobbs. She began by asking both sides for summaries. Karen's lawyer gave a long-winded explanation about neighborhood expectations, unharmonious barriers, and emotional distress caused by abrupt landscape alteration. Rita kept it short. The fence is legal. The land is privately owned, clearly marked, and the plaintiff drove onto it, damaged property, then attempted to misrepresent jurisdiction through the HOA. We have video, maps, historical records, and evidence of targeted harassment. Then we showed the video, Karen flinching on the screen when she saw my camera caught her trespassing. That got an audible reaction from the room. Then came the drone footage, her SUV driving around the warning sign and onto my ranch road. The moment she hit the fence wasn't caught in full, but the before and after angles were clear. The impact location was deep inside my legal boundary. 8 feet, to be exact. Rita passed the court survey across the bench. Karen's side objected, claimed the land hadn't been measured with community context in mind. That got them a long look from Judge Hobbs. Then Rita brought out the California file, Karen's past case. Her attempt to annex a strip of her neighbor's lawn into HOA control wasn't just relevant, it was damning. It showed a pattern, and it was certified public record. Karen visibly stiffened as Rita read the findings. Knowingly misrepresented HOA authority. Attempted use of enforcement threats without jurisdiction. Ruling in favor of defendant. Then came the HOA's most desperate move, their flyer with the influence perimeter. We showed that too. The judge blinked at the map and said flatly, "This is fiction." By the end of the hearing, the air in the room felt heavy. Not tense. Decided. Karen wouldn't meet my eyes. One of her lawyers leaned in and whispered something that made her purse her lips like she'd bitten into a lemon. The judge didn't issue a ruling yet. That would come in a few days, but her expression said plenty. Outside the courthouse, a few neighbors clapped me on the back. One even handed me a hot coffee from the food truck. Karen and her legal team didn't stick around. They beelined for the SUV, trying to avoid eye contact. As I sipped the coffee and watched them drive off, Rita turned to me and said, You know, if she files one more nuisance report, we might have grounds for a restraining order. I smiled. Well, wouldn't that be harmonious? 3 days after the hearing, the ruling landed like a hammer blow. Rita called me just after lunch, voice calm but sharp with satisfaction. "We won," she said. "All of it." I didn't say anything right away. Just let it sink in. Then I muttered, "Good." The judge's decision was thorough. The court found that Karen had knowingly trespassed, caused property damage, and attempted to mislead both law enforcement and civil authorities with false claims of jurisdiction. Her civil case against me was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she couldn't file it again. But that wasn't the end of it. The court also granted my counterclaim. Karen was personally liable for the damage to the fence and more. The HOA, acting under her direction, was found guilty of malicious interference with private property and defamation due to the newspaper column they'd ghost-written under her name. Between the fence repairs, legal fees, and reputational harm, the total compensation awarded came to $58,000. I didn't even have to fake my reaction when I read the breakdown. Rita grinned across the table and said, "Not bad for a Marine with a tape measure." The kicker. The judge also issued a formal injunction against the HOA, prohibiting any further monitoring or regulatory actions toward my land, or anyone else outside their legal boundary. If they so much as sent another newsletter my way, they'd be in contempt. But the part that really made my day, Karen wasn't just ordered to pay damages. The court also referred her false police report to the sheriff's office for review. Within a week, she was officially cited and given a 6-month suspended sentence, plus 100 hours of community service for wasting emergency resources and filing knowingly false claims. That little nugget made it into the paper too. Front page, right below the high school rodeo results. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board tried to spin it as a miscommunication, but that ship had sailed. Members started pulling out. 3 families put their homes up for sale within a week. I even got a call from one of the remaining board members, an older guy named Robert, asking if I'd be willing to attend a restorative community dialogue. I told him the only dialogue I was interested in was the sound of peace and quiet. That weekend, I decided to celebrate in the only way that felt right. I hauled out my generator, my welder, and a heavy steel sign I'd been holding onto, mounted it right on the post where Karen's Lexus had folded in on itself. It read, "Caution, objects in mirror are dumber than they appear subtle. No, satisfying, extremely." Later that evening, I was out brushing down my horse when I saw a familiar figure walking along the property line. Maggie, the realtor from a few weeks back. She raised a hand, grinned, and shouted, "Heard the news!" I nodded. "Guess the fence wins after all." She laughed. "More like the man behind it." A week after the verdict, Cedar Hollow started to fracture. I didn't need to drive through the community to know things had shifted. They came to me. Residents I'd never spoken to before started showing up at my gate, sometimes alone, sometimes in quiet groups of 2 or 3. Most came to apologize. Some just wanted to vent. One guy, balding, in a pressed polo, introduced himself as Frank Menzies, a founding member of the HOA. "I never wanted it to turn into this," he said. "It was supposed to be about keeping trash cans off the road, making sure lawns weren't dead." Karen turned it into a crusade. "She always did like a holy war," I replied. He sighed, pulled a folded paper from his back pocket, and handed it over. A printed agenda for an emergency HOA board meeting. The top item read, "Motion for removal of President Karen Dewhurst. Unanimous vote expected," he said quietly. "We need to stop the bleeding." It didn't stop there. The local paper ran a follow-up story, not just on the court ruling, but on the pattern of abuse Karen had exercised under the HOA umbrella. That got picked up by a regional blog. By Thursday, I had a voicemail from a local AM radio host asking if I'd do an interview. I politely declined. I'd said everything I needed to in court, but Karen, she was unraveling. She didn't just lose the presidency. She lost the support of every fence-sitting neighbor who once waved her through meetings. Turns out a lot of folks weren't fans of how she'd spent HOA dues, fighting personal battles, hiring lawyers, and redesigning perimeter control policies. I heard she'd been hit with a civil ethics complaint by her own board, and her Lexus was now parked permanently in her garage, a tarp draped over the front like a bandage. The final nail, HOA members started filing to dissolve the association altogether, not all of them, mind you, but enough to trigger a mandatory vote. If 40% of members petitioned, the HOA charter could be challenged. Robert, the board member who called me earlier, rang again. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "What you did, it scared us at first, but you made us realize we'd let her hijack everything." I didn't say much, just let him talk. He ended the call with, "If you ever want to sell that land of yours, there's a lot of interest." Of course there was. Developers had been sniffing around my acreage for years, especially with water access and high elevation, but I wasn't selling. Not a damn inch. Later that week, I hosted a small cookout near the newly reinforced gate. Just a few friends, some brisket, some beer. We sat under the archway, watching the sun drop behind the hills. Someone asked, "Think she'll ever show her face again?" I took a sip, glanced at the ridge where her SUV used to peek out during her patrols. "If she does," I said, "I hope she brought a helmet." The group laughed. The air was cool, clean, and quiet. That was all I wanted. It was just past dawn when I drove out to the northern gate with my welder again. This time there was no accident to fix, no fence to re-straighten. The steel was clean, the ground packed, the brush cleared. But something about that stretch felt unfinished. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, ever since the court ruling, the collapse of Karen's reign, the whispers about HOA dissolution. This land had stood through storms, drought, and fools with delusions of authority. It deserved a marker that spoke in clear terms. So I set to work. The arch went up slow. Hand-cut iron letters, forged locally, bolted to a curved beam across the gateposts. By mid-morning it read, "Private range, not for HOA business." When I stepped back to look at it, hands blackened and sore, it felt right. Like punctuation at the end of a long, ridiculous sentence. Later that day, a delivery truck rolled up the old ranch road. A guy in a ball cap stepped out and handed me a stack of certified envelopes. Turns out, the HOA dissolution vote was moving forward, fast. Over 60% of members had signed. Karen's faction was in full retreat, trying to salvage what little was left. It wouldn't work. The cherry on top? A local zoning officer emailed me directly. Turns out Karen's false report had prompted an internal audit. She'd pushed so many complaints over the years that now her own property was being investigated for illegal grading work and non-permitted fencing. Poetic justice with paperwork. A few days later, I got one last visit I didn't expect. Karen. She pulled up in a different car, an old Subaru dented along the side. No makeup, no clipboard, no entourage, just her and that stiff, resentful posture. She stayed behind the gate. "I came to apologize," she said. Voice flat, eyes darting everywhere but mine. This got out of hand. I just thought, I cut her off. "You thought you could control land that doesn't belong to you. That's not how it works here." She nodded once, turned without another word, and drove away. I didn't feel triumph, just relief. That part of my life, the part where I had to fight tooth and nail to protect what was already mine, was over. Weeks passed. The gate stayed quiet. The sign remained untouched. And my ranch? It flourished. I got back to real work, fixing fence lines, breeding stock, hauling hay. The things that mattered. Every now and then, someone still asked me what happened to the lady who thought she could rewrite the law with a newsletter and a frown. I'd just smile and say, "She mistook my property line for a finish line. Turns out it was a dead end."